Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked, but choices that might have changed everything. Here we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences, slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The train window gives him back a stranger, an 11-year-old boy, glasses slightly crooked, scar half hidden beneath untidy hair, watching his own reflection fracture and reassemble as the Hogwarts Express carves through the countryside. His lips do not move, but in the silence of his mind, he repeats the sentence that has stalked his childhood like a private curse. Either must die at the hand of the other. In this timeline, Harry Potter boards the train already knowing the rest of that prophecy, already understanding that neither can live while the other survives, is not poetry, but architecture, an invisible blueprint for a future war in which his death is not a possibility, but a structural requirement. He is not wondering what awaits him in the castle on the hill. He is calculating how many corridors of that fortress he will have to bleed through before the end. The wizarding world believes a different story. They believe the boy who lived is an accident of love and luck, a child shaped by protection and ignorance, a blank canvas onto which destiny projected its favorite myth, the innocent hero. They are wrong. In the Slytherin timeline, Harry does not arrive as a bewildered orphan to be guided, curated, and gently lied to by Albus Dumbledore. He arrives as a variable Dumbledore failed to contain, a witness to secrets that were never meant to reach 11-year-old ears. From the beginning, the roles invert. Canon grants Voldemort the dignity of authorship, the Dark Lord as master planner, Harry as the reactive piece scrambling to interpret scattered clues. Here, that hierarchy collapses. Imagine a world where the child on the train holds the complete schematic of the coming conflict, Horcruxes catalogued, resurrection ritual mapped, ministry coup anticipated, the fall of Hogwarts projected with methodical certainty. And it is Voldemort, not the boy, who is walking blind into someone else's design. Harry's knowledge is not vague premonition, it is inventory. The diary is not a mystery waiting in a second-year girl's cauldron. It is an asset he intends to intercept. The ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, Nagini, each is already a point on a mental campaign map, a series of pressure nodes in a soul resonance network he plans to dismantle. Most disturbing of all, he already suspects the final fragment lives behind his own eyes. He is not asking, "Who am I?" He is asking, with tactically lethal calm, "What am I willing to become?" This is not a power fantasy, it is a moral autopsy conducted in advance. If a child grows up knowing that his enemy's survival guarantees the world's descent into darkness, and that his own death is the keystone that will hold back that collapse, what does he train himself to be? A hero, embracing sacrifice, a weapon being polished in the dark, accepting dehumanization as the price of victory, or a colder, third category, a masterpiece to be molded by his own hand, who treats prophecy as raw material and people, friends, mentors, enemies, as pieces on a board he is prepared to break. On the Hogwarts Express, As the castle's silhouette begins to rise in the distance, Harry Potter makes a quiet decision that will rewrite every familiar scene. He will not wait to be told the truth. He already has it. The only question left is how he intends to use it. The night everything changes, a different Halloween, 1981. He already has it, but the reason he has it does not begin on the Hogwarts Express, or even in the cupboard under the stairs. It begins in a cottage in Godric's Hollow, on a night the wizarding world believes it understands with comforting, almost liturgical certainty. They are wrong. Halloween, 1981. The timeline aligns with canon down to the creak of the gate and the whisper of robes. Voldemort passes through the wards as though through smoke, ascends the stairs with that same methodical certainty, and levels his wand at a man who dies too quickly to scream. James falls. Lily begs. The Dark Lord raises the Elder Wand's predecessor, and the killing curse flowers green in the nursery air. In canon, what follows is framed as a miracle. Love against death, protection against power, the curse rebounding like light off a shield. In this timeline, the interaction is far less sentimental and far more precise. Lily's sacrificial magic is not a wall, it is a field. Harry's nascent magic is not passive, it is searching. Voldemort's soul, already fractured by prior atrocities, is not a simple unit. It is granular, unstable, primed for further division. When the curse detonates, these three forces do not merely collide, they resonate. The Department of Mysteries will one day coin a term for it, soul resonance, to describe what happens when a fragmented soul, a sacrificial ward, and an unformed magical core intersect at the exact moment of lethal intent. The result is not just a Horcrux, it is a psychic echo, an imprint of directional will. Voldemort's intentions, his obsessions, his projected futures are compressed and burned into the only available substrate, the consciousness of the child he is trying to erase. Clinically, it is closer to an encrypted archive than a possession. The shard of soul that clings to Harry carries structure as well as malice, patterns of thought, strategic priorities, half-formed sequences of action, all sealed beneath layers of instinct and infant amnesia. A blueprint, but written in a language Harry will spend years unconsciously decoding. From the inside, the moment feels nothing like theory. Time fractures. The nursery becomes a prism. The green light does not simply blind, it splits, refracting into filaments of memory that are not his, a diary opening of its own accord, a cup glinting in the dim of a high-security vault, a serpent coiled possessively around a throne that is more idea than chair, a wand of elder wood raised in triumph over a castle that burns. The world will say, Voldemort vanished. Again, they are wrong. Part of his war is simply archived in Harry. Harry is no longer merely an unintended Horcrux. He is the masterpiece misfire of Voldemort's own design, a living repository of his enemy's strategic mind, a masterpiece to be molded into either perfect nemesis or perfect asset. In the Slytherin timeline, this is not a philosophical distinction, it is a tactical one. And somewhere far from Godric's Hollow, as the dark mark fades and the Ministry congratulates itself, another mind twitches at the disturbance, feels the echo of that soul resonance like a distant scream through stone. someone notices. Not Dumbledore, someone who will not waste a weapon being polished in the dark. The war does not end in Godric's Hollow that night. It changes theatres. The next move belongs to the one who hears the echo and decides to follow it into the ruins. Raised in the shadows, an obsessive guardian and a hidden child. The estate is never on a map. It exists where the moors bleed into granite hills, where fog and bracken conspire with wards to erase the horizon. From the outside, it is a forgotten manor, swallowed by ivy. From the inside, it is a fortress of corridors, runes, and locked doors, built to contain a single anomaly and the adult who claimed him. In this timeline, Harry Potter is not shoved into a cupboard. He is installed like a volatile artifact in a ward-shrouded safe house, every window layered with detection webs, every hearth sealed from the flue. This is not a home. It is a laboratory, a controlled environment where silence is a tool and observation a ritual. One child, one guardian, two predators learning the other's scent. The world will later insist that Albus Dumbledore orchestrated every hidden safeguard around the boy who lived. They are wrong. The echo that night in Godric's Hollow is heard instead by Severus Snape, a man who understands dark magic not as theory, but as a scar tissue woven through his own soul. Drawn to the ruins by that soul resonance, he finds the infant, the ruined house, and the faint psychic pressure of something else coiled behind green eyes. Snape does not report this discovery in full. He becomes, officially, a reluctant custodian dispatched by the Order to keep the child off the board. Unofficially, he becomes an architect, a masterpiece to be moulded. The safe house is placed under his authority, bound by oaths and monitored by Dumbledore at a polite distance, but the day-to-day reality is Snape's alone to design. The first fracture in normality appears when Harry begins to speak in his sleep. Not words at first, names, a diary, a ring, a cup, a snake, a graveyard. The litany repeats with methodical certainty, like a child reciting colours. Snape listens from the doorway, wand steady, mind already cataloguing. He has seen enough of the Dark Lord's experiments to recognise that this is not coincidence. This is pattern. Legilimency follows, at first tentative, then invasive. Potion-aided dreams are brewed in a cauldron that once simmered with poisons for the Death Eaters. Now it distills memories from a boy's fractured mind. Under the oily surface of sleep, images cohere, a diary cradled in a cauldron shop window, a ring gleaming on a skeletal hand in a desolate shack, a snake striking in a graveyard while robed figures watch. An internal map, scrambled but intact, of a war that technically has not yet begun. Pattern interrupt, Snape realizes with a cold, precise horror that the boy does not simply remember the past differently. He remembers the future as if it has already happened and he has already died in it. From that moment, the relationship ossifies into something uniquely corrosive. Snape oscillates between genuine protectiveness, warding the estate with the paranoia of a hunted man, and the cold calculation of a strategist who sees, in Harry, a weapon being polished in the dark. He drills occlumency before reading, etiquette before play, teaching the child to lock thoughts away before he is allowed to name them. Harry learns just as quickly. Affection comes as reward for clarity. for another coherent fragment about a locket in a cave or a diadem in a castle. Withholding earns silence, clipped words, the withdrawal of even that brittle warmth. He internalizes the lesson with tactically lethal speed. Usefulness is safety. Secrets are power. By the time he is 9, bedtime is a ritual of war. Harry stands before a tarnished mirror in a narrow room, tracing the lightning scar with one finger, reciting his private litany. Diary, ring, locket, cup, diadem, snake, himself. Each word is a star on a constellation. Only he and his guardian can see. Beyond the thin wall, Snape sits at a desk, buried in parchment, quill scratching as he matches each image to rumours, archives, and half-remembered boasts from Death Eater revels. The world sleeps, believing the Dark Lord a memory. In the warded silence of the estate, a child whispers the inventory of his enemy's soul, while a former Death Eater takes notes, already planning a Horcrux hunt the Order has not even imagined. The Slytherin timeline does not wait for Hogwarts. The war is being drafted in crayon and ink long before Harry ever sees the castle's lights across the lake. Forged, not raised. Harry's childhood as a war project. By the time most children are learning multiplication tables, Harry Potter's life has already been reduced to a schedule, not a childhood, a protocol. Mornings in the Alpine fortress begin before dawn, when the wards are still humming low and blue against the snow. Bellatrix wakes him with a tap of her wand to the sternum, a tiny shock to anchor him in his body, and the first hour belongs to discipline. Running laps along the inner courtyard, balance drills on narrow parapets, wandless focus exercises where a misdirected pulse of magic means starting again from zero. In this timeline, stamina is not for Quidditch. It is for surviving curses and outlasting sieges. Afternoons are reserved for controlled magic, never the wild, delighted experimentation of a normal young wizard. Each spell is a problem set. Harry is required to articulate its theory, its counters, its potential for escalation. A simple shield charm becomes a seminar on angle, force, and lethal ricochet. When he miscasts, Bellatrix does not shout. She makes him diagram the failure in ink until the pattern is carved into memory. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, and weapons are not allowed to improvise. Evenings are the most brutal. After dinner, the estate falls into orchestrated silence, and Harry is led to a warded chamber whose only furniture is a low chair and a pensieve. Guided occlumency gives way to guided immersion. He is steered back into his nightmares, into green light and high, cold laughter, instructed to pause each moment and name what he sees. Wand movement, emotional timbre, the precise cadence of Voldemort's rage. Bellatrix records, occasionally correcting his language, not anger, Harry, contempt, until the Dark Lord's psyche becomes a taxonomy rather than a terror. The prophecy enters his curriculum as coolly as arithmancy. At 8, perhaps 9, his guardian sits opposite him, candlelight cutting her face into planes of shadow, and recites, "Neither can live while the other survives." She does not ask how he feels. She asks what it implies. Line by line they dissect it, treating his potential death as a variable, a necessary unknown in a long equation of war. By the end of the lesson, Harry can list 3 scenarios in which his own sacrifice optimizes the outcome. Fear is acknowledged, then sidelined as strategically unhelpful. Horcrux theory becomes the backbone of everything. He is not handed the filthiest tomes. He is given curated excerpts, diagrams, and case studies of soul resonance gone wrong. Under strict supervision, he learns to recognize the greasy distortion in the magic of murder, the way certain anchors would feel in a dream. A diary that thinks back, a ring that hums with ancestral spite, a locket that tightens around the throat, a cup that never empties, a diadem whispering brilliance, a snake whose mind is too clean for an animal. In this Slytherin timeline, he is solving the Horcrux puzzle years before Dumbledore even admits it exists. The psychological cost is deliberate. Harry is praised when he can describe a disembowelment ritual without flinching, corrected with cold disappointment when he lingers on the victim's panic instead of the spell work. His empathy does not vanish. It is stretched, contorted around a prematurely internalized greater good until he can say with methodical certainty that one life on an altar may prevent 1,000 on a battlefield. They are wrong, those who later insist he was born ruthless. He was taught. Here the contrast with the cupboard under the stairs becomes almost obscene. Canon Harry survived by escaping into fantasy stories and vague dreams of elsewhere. This Harry escapes into contingency plans. When other children imagine dragons, he imagines how you would interrupt a resurrection ritual at the moment of soul transfer, while a different world lets the war ambush a bewildered 11-year-old on a broomstick. This timeline sends a boy to Hogwarts who already knows the endgame and is quietly drafting a way to reach it without ever needing to die. The question is not whether he will fight, it is what a child shaped like this will decide the world deserves once he wins. Blueprint of a monster, mapping Voldemort's plan before it happens. So they begin with the only battlefield available to a child, his own mind. While another Harry would try to forget nightmares, this one sits upright in the alpine dark and recites them like intelligence reports, and Bellatrix listens with the stillness of a general marking artillery positions on an unseen map. The method is brutally simple. Harry describes what returns, not once, but over and over, stone angels leaning over a small neglected grave, a cauldron so large it could drown a man, green light flaring against a ring of hooded silhouettes, masked figures standing beneath a glass ceiling he somehow knows belongs to the ministry atrium. Bellatrix, who has walked through enough raids to hear the echoes, cross-references each image with whispered accounts of Death Eater operations, with half-remembered prophecies, with the known architecture of power in Wizarding Britain. In this timeline, divination is not a joke. It is reconnaissance. Piece by piece, the resurrection ritual emerges from the fog, a graveyard, not a random one, but bound by blood and name, implies an anchor in old family magic. A bone wrenched from the earth by spellfire tells her this will not be a symbolic rite, but a physical rebirth. The way Harry's scar burns when he mentions his own blood near the cauldron allows only one conclusion. Voldemort will not merely return, he will lash his existence to Harry's body, to the Potter line, using a ritual that treats the boy as both key and sacrifice. They do not know the exact wording of bone of the father flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy, but the structure of the spell is already pinned, dissected, and filed like a war crime yet to be committed. Then the soul resonance deepens. When Harry closes his eyes, he can distinguish textures, the slick, unnatural smoothness of a diary cover, the clammy chill of damp stone around it, the faint impression of a girl crying in a bathroom. Bellatrix overlays that with Hogwarts blueprints and ministry reports about a dead Weasley child, and the first Horcrux is retroactively identified. The oppressive heat and metallic gleam that pulse through his dreams, coupled with a suffocating sense of goblin wards, point toward a Gringotts vault glutted with gold. Later, a cramped, dust-heavy pressure, surrounded by the psychic clutter of hidden contraband, evokes a room that hides what everyone wants to forget. The room of requirement is not yet named, but it is already circled in red on the mental map of the Slytherin timeline. From there, the macro structure of Voldemort's war becomes a flowchart, not a mystery. First box, regain a body through the graveyard rite. Second, infiltrate and capture the ministry, because authority over law is authority over narrative. Third, seize Hogwarts, the only true fortress that also manufactures soldiers. Harry grows up walking past a literal diagram on the study wall. Arrows, dates, projected years of his schooling, until the sequence is so ingrained he can rehearse it like a spell. And here lies the inversion that makes this world genuinely dangerous. Canon Harry stumbles from crisis to crisis, improvising heroism amid ignorance. They are wrong to assume that chaos is safer. A boy who knows the year, the corridor, the likely body count before each catastrophe is a weapon being polished in the dark. He runs counter-scenarios in silence. How to derail the graveyard without dying. How to fracture the ministry coup by prepositioning allies. How to let Hogwarts fall just long enough to identify every future warlord in his year. His life becomes a pre-scripted campaign he has no intention of obeying. A masterpiece to be molded from the inside out. The next phase of his evolution will not be about knowledge. It will be about what he is willing to break to make the timeline obey him. Weaponizing the boy, occlumency, masks, and the art of playing dumb. But knowledge alone does not win a war. Uncontained, it corrodes. The next move in this timeline is not another revelation, but a discipline. Harry's mind must be engineered so that foreknowledge becomes architecture, not acid. Bellatrix does not wait for a crisis with Snape or a botched lesson with Dumbledore. Occlumency begins before Hogwarts, before wands and houses and house cups. In the alpine silence of the Lestrange estate, his consciousness is treated as a construction site. Each piece of Voldemort's plan, the Horcrux map, the prophecy's wording, the likely dates of ministry coups, is not merely remembered, it is placed. Bellatrix walks him through mental blueprints where memories are sealed in nested vaults, surrounded by false corridors of fabricated schoolboy anxieties and banal childhood scenes. If a Legilimens enters, they encounter a believable chaos of petty fears and adolescent embarrassments, never the methodical certainty of a child planning a Dark Lord's execution. Canon describes Harry as impulsive, stubborn, and chronically allergic to rules. They are not flaws here, they are raw materials. His tendency to act on instinct is drilled until it becomes trained tactical intuition. He rehearses responses to hypothetical ambushes, interrogations, and duels until gut feeling is simply preloaded strategy firing faster than thought. His stubbornness, mocked in another world as teenage defiance, is reforged into unyielding mental wards. When Bellatrix hisses, "Do not yield," she is no longer speaking about disobedience, but about never letting an intrusive presence push past the third inner gate of his mind. Even his rule-breaking is repurposed. In this Slytherin timeline, he does not rebel for the thrill of transgression. He studies rules, like structural engineers study load-bearing walls, learning exactly where to cut without bringing the fortress down on his head. Every violation is accompanied by an exit strategy, a scapegoat, a fallback narrative. Recklessness becomes deniable subversion. To contain this evolution, Bellatrix names a triad that will define his growth: mind, voice, edge. Mind governs occlumency and strategic planning, the citadel within, where every secret is catalogued and every contingency measured against the prophecy's brutal arithmetic. Voice is the cultivation of masks, feigned ignorance with professors, calculated vulnerability with peers, the ability to look Dumbledore in the eye and radiate confused, grateful boyhood while silently counting the old man's tells. Edge is the most dangerous. Controlled exposure to borderline dark magic, not as ideology, but as instrumentation, a weapon being polished in the dark. Under Edge, Harry learns to treat his magic as a scalpel, not a hammer. Horcruxes are not legends to him, but technical problems demanding precise, often ugly solutions. Basilisk venom and fiendfire, blood wards and ritual inversions. He is taught to feel soul resonance as a practical sense, a prickle at the edge of perception when a fragment of Voldemort's being is near. He is not allowed to be merely a boy. He is an instrument honed to cut the Dark Lord's soul and survive the recoil. By the time Hogwarts looms, Harry understands sovereignty as internal before it is political. His mind is a citadel under quiet siege, his public self a mask he can don or discard with theatrical ease. His magic and edge he will unsheath only when the calculus demands it. And it is then, as she tightens the last mental ward, that his guardian gives him a final chilling warning. One day, Dumbledore will try to enter your mind for your own good. When that day comes, she says, you will smile, you will nod, and you will show him exactly what he expects to see, and nothing more. A world without a naive chosen one, off-screen canon starts to fracture. From that moment, the world begins misreading Harry Potter on an industrial scale. The wizarding world operates under a fundamental delusion in this timeline, that the boy who lived has grown into a quiet, unremarkable child, his trauma dissolving into suburban mediocrity. They are wrong. The early 90s unfold in a deceptive, almost bureaucratic calm. In 1990, there is no vanishing glass at the zoo, no snake released to terrorize Dudley, no panicked ministry trace chasing wild magic across Surrey. Harry's guardian has drilled his instincts into a disciplined stillness. Accidental magic is redirected into private exercises, contained within the four walls of a muggle house that has been turned, invisibly, into a training cell. To neighbours and passing squibs, he is merely withdrawn. Inside, a weapon is being polished in the dark. Because nothing explodes in public, Nothing is investigated. The Ministry files on Harry James Potter remain thin, perfunctory, and above all, closed. By 1991, when Canon would have delivered letters through chimneys and owls through keyholes, there is only silence. The Hogwarts Quell records his existence. The system sends its letter. It never reaches him. Wards, occlumency, and a guardian's paranoia intercept the entire ritual of recruitment. The boy who lived becomes a bureaucratic anomaly who simply does not reply. That absence has consequences. Lucius Malfoy, never pressured by rumors of Harry's troubles at school, retains the diary far longer, reassured that there is no precocious rival drawing Dumbledore's attention. The Death Eater diaspora, sensing no visible child hero, reorganizes not around grand gestures, but around quiet patronage, charity fronts, and ministry influence. In this Slytherin timeline, the corruption at the heart of the Ministry is not checked by Lockhart scandals or chamber panics. It deepens, layer by layer, under the weight of unchallenged authority. Dumbledore feels the fracture first. By 1992, his usual channels, Arabella Figg's reports, McGonagall's watchful curiosity, Hagrid's loose tongue, yield nothing but banalities. No outbursts, no complaints, no bruises even loud enough to reach Order ears, yet the prophecy's magic, that faint soul resonance between boy and monster, has shifted. It is present, but shielded, as though someone has wrapped the thread in ice. Each attempt to locate Harry through more esoteric means is met with resistance, a blankness that is too precise to be natural. Every failure only convinces the Guardian that Dumbledore must be kept out at any cost. The pattern interrupt comes not from Hogwarts, but from the ruins and forests where Voldemort clings to existence. In 1993, as he drifts from host to host, he too notices that the tether is muted. He cannot lean through Harry's dreams, cannot ride the boy's emotions as a compass. In this timeline, his enemy is not broadcasting fear. He is broadcasting nothing. Forced to adapt, Voldemort abandons some of his theatrical recklessness and begins to plan with methodical certainty, cultivating allies rather than merely commanding them. By 1994, both sides are circling an absence. The war is not paused, it is coiling tighter, its energy stored in institutions, in laws, in unspoken expectations. The wizarding world believes peace has held. They are wrong again. Behind the facade, a masterpiece to be molded is counting years, rehearsing lies, and mapping vulnerabilities with tactically lethal patience. Harry is not waiting to be summoned to Hogwarts. He is waiting for the battlefield gates to open. The Dark Lord reborn early. A stronger, colder Voldemort. The first mistake the wizarding world makes in this new phase of the war is assuming that, without Harry's mind to parasitize, Voldemort is weakened, directionless, drifting. They are wrong. Deprived of the easy, feverish conduit of a Gryffindor adolescent, the Dark Lord turns inward, to the only network he has ever truly trusted, his own fragmented soul. In this timeline, the Horcrux lattice becomes his laboratory, trapped as a diminished wraith in some Eastern European ruin. He abandons the crude hope of simply riding a host to Britain, and instead begins to press against the diary and the ring, testing their thresholds, using them as occult relay stations. The diary, once merely a trap for a schoolgirl, is repurposed as an anchor for experimental possession. The gaunt ring, steeped in ancestral hatred, becomes a focus for partial manifestations, a way to bleed intent into the world without risking full exposure. The first proto-resurrection does not happen in 1992 with Ginny Weasley. It happens years earlier, in the stale, echoing silence of the Chamber of Secrets, when a lonely Ravenclaw boy follows a whispering script into the pipes and bleeds himself into the diary's waiting pages. What crawls out of the ink is not yet fully Tom Riddle and not yet Voldemort, but a semi-corporeal hybrid that can pace the chamber floor, can touch stone, can command the basilisk in short, vicious bursts before the magic collapses. The boy's death is ruled an accident. The chamber is resealed. The records are sealed even tighter. For the Ministry, it is a closed case. For Voldemort, it is a revelation. Each failure teaches him the limitations of soul resonance across distances, the energetic cost of forcing density onto a memory, the value of subtle infiltration over theatrical return. He learns to ride edges instead of storms, to haunt ledgers and policies long before he haunts skies. By the time the graveyard ritual is finally enacted, this is not the half-mad shade of canon clawing his way back into meat. This is a colder, optimized predator who has iterated on his own resurrection like an engineer refining a weapon. He steps from the cauldron with methodical certainty, his magic sheathed rather than screaming, his eyes less wild fanatic and more calculating architect. The war that follows reflects that shift. Voldemort becomes less a howling spectre and more a shadow architect, a presence that rewrites institutions from within. The Ministry's fall, when it comes, is not marked by skulls over London, but by memos, subclauses, and quiet appointments. Departments are hollowed out, not blasted open. The fortress rots from the foundation, while the facade of authority remains serenely intact, and that makes the rot infinitely harder to cut away. Yet every refinement he makes to this dark masterpiece is already, in outline, known to the boy in the Alpine estate. Through long-range soul resonance, Harry has watched the diary twitch, felt the ring flare, traced the pattern of each aborted incarnation. The Dark Lord believes he is perfecting a new script. In the Slytherin timeline, he is only polishing a performance his enemy has been rehearsing since childhood. The 11-year decision. Why Harry chooses to enter the arena. Magic moves first. Around Harry's 11th birthday, the quiet of the Alpine fortress begins to fracture. In the deepest vault of Hogwarts, where the Book of Admittance and Quill of Acceptance have recorded a millennium of births with monastic calm, something unprecedented happens. The ink slashes, the pages tremble, and Harry James Potter's name tries to write itself again and again, each stroke shattering against Lestrange obfuscation wards. The castle itself is reaching for a child it believes it already owns. In this timeline, the conflict does not begin with a letter on a doormat. It begins with letters that never arrive. Scrolls addressed to Mr. H. Potter ignite in mid-air as they hit the perimeter charms, falling as ash over snow. Owls circle the estate in widening, frantic spirals, unable to land, their wings beating against invisible glass. At night, the pressure becomes intimate. Prophetic dreams sharpen into surgical visions of stone corridors, shifting staircases, and a great hall that waits like an open mouth. The more Bellatrix reinforces the wards, the more the world pushes back, a metaphysical tug-of-war over one boy who is already a weapon being polished in the dark. The argument, when it comes, is not a shouting match. It is a board meeting before a war. Bellatrix wants silence, delay, control. She outlines, with methodical certainty, a plan to keep him hidden until Voldemort's evolving Horcrux architecture is fully mapped, until Dumbledore is either neutralized or exposed. Why walk into the headmaster's line of sight when they can operate from the margins, strike unseen, dismantle the Dark Lord's anchors, one by one? Harry listens. Then he dismantles her strategy with the same cold precision she once used on enemies in Azkaban. Hogwarts, he argues, is not a risk. It is the convergence point. The diary is already there, humming in the hands of a doomed Weasley girl. The diadem sleeps above the room of requirement. Dumbledore's authority, the Ministry's paranoia, the public myth of the boy who lived. Every vector of power and perception intersects at that castle. To outmaneuver both Voldemort and Dumbledore, he cannot remain a rumour in the mountains. He must occupy the narrative centre they are both trying to script. This is the core of his realization. You cannot redirect a river from a snowflake on a distant peak. You go to the bend in the current. You stand in the flood. He already knows, from prophecy and reconstructed memories, that his life is collateral in Dumbledore's long game. That either must die at the hand of the other is not poetry, but operational doctrine. He walks toward that end with open eyes, because in the Slytherin timeline, death is not an event. It is a resource to be scheduled. The tension breaks in a small, almost domestic moment. A single Hogwarts letter, forced through by the book's insistence and the quill's fury, survives the wards and lands on an alpine windowsill, smoking faintly. Harry reads it once, then twice, then he signs. His hand is steady. The quill's scratch is quiet. He is not accepting an education. He is consenting to step onto a board whose every square he has already walked in nightmares. What he has not yet seen is who will be waiting on the opposite side when he takes his first step onto platform 9 3/4. Terms of engagement: Harry, Dumbledore, and the first political gambit. The answer is, Dumbledore is not the first move. He is the first test. In this timeline, Harry does not meet the headmaster amid floating candles and bewitched ceiling. He meets him in a warded antechamber behind the leaky cauldron, where the air tastes of old magic and older bureaucracy. The Ministry calls it a secure consultation chamber. Granite walls, a single alpine window charmed opaque, 3 chairs at an obsidian table that looks disturbingly like an altar, neutral ground by statute, a battlefield by intent. Dumbledore arrives expecting a narrative he understands, a frightened boy brutalized by muggles, and a deranged Death Eater grateful for clemency. They are wrong. Waiting for him instead is a child whose gaze lands and holds with methodical certainty Occlumency walls smooth as black glass, and Bellatrix Lestrange seated with the stillness of a coiled wand, parchment already arrayed in front of her like battle plans. The opening courtesies are brittle. Dumbledore speaks of safety, of Hogwarts as a sanctuary of Harry's opportunity to grow beyond the shadows of war. Bellatrix replies in the language of terms, conditions, and immunities, each clause articulated with legal precision she should not possess. She places a single scroll between them, a proposed pact that reframes the boy who lived not as a ward of the light, but as a sovereign asset on loan. The explicit bargain is stark. In exchange for Harry's enrollment and his public cooperation with the boy who lived narrative, smiles for the prophet, feasts attended, house unity speeches delivered on cue, Dumbledore will guarantee legal protection and full amnesty for Bellatrix, non-interference in certain private studies conducted off campus, and, most galling, a strict limitation on the headmaster's access to Harry's mind and movements. No unsupervised legilimency, no unauthorized tracking charms, no secret prophecies whispered into his ear without counsel present. Dumbledore pushes back. Of course, he invokes the greater good, the need for flexibility in times of gathering darkness, the argument that authority must retain some discretionary reach if the world is to be defended. It is calculated, paternal, almost gentle. That is when the pattern breaks. Harry speaks. He does not raise his voice. He asks, with surgical calm, whether the greater good applies equally to generals and to soldiers. If sacrifice is righteous, should not those in command be the first to surrender power? If a child is to walk one day into a forest to die at another man's wand, is it not a lesser sacrifice for a headmaster to sign away a few surveillance privileges? The question hangs in the silence like a killing curse that has not yet chosen a direction. For a fractional second, Dumbledore sees it. Not a masterpiece to be moulded, but a weapon being polished in the dark, already tactically lethal. Then the twinkle returns, thinner now, and he signs. He believes he has contained the Slytherin timeline within castle walls, that by wheeling the boy who lived into his fortress he can guide, monitor, redeem. He is wrong. What crosses his wards is not a grateful student. It is a Trojan horse with soul resonance tuned to every crack in Hogwarts' foundations, already mapping which stones must fall first when the real war begins. The mask arrives at Hogwarts. A different first year begins. The train station is where the legend should have begun, with wonder and panic, and lost tickets. In this timeline, the wonder is real, but it runs parallel to something colder, an underground river beneath the surface current. On the platform, Harry watches the scarlet engine breathe steam like a waking dragon. Outwardly, he performs the wide-eyed orphan, fingers grazing brick, gaze tracking owls and cauldrons, questions about platforms and trolleys. Inwardly, his mind is already a ledger, Horcrux vectors, diary confirmed, cup probable, diadem hypothesized. The forbidden forest appears in a remembered dream as a future hunting ground. The castle above as both fortress and mausoleum. He steps through the barrier with the stillness of alpine marble. Where Canon Harry would stumble, this one glides, self-contained, every motion deliberate, every pause a calculated invitation for others to approach first. His eyes drink in everything, family crests on trunks, ministry-grade wards humming against the station's iron, and give nothing back unless he chooses. A weapon being polished in the dark does not clatter when it moves. Ron Weasley arrives in a burst of noise and ginger and hand-me-down insecurity. To most, he is comic relief. They are wrong. Harry clocks the lineage in one glance. Prowett echoes in the cheekbones. Weasley red marking him as old magic without old money. A link into the decaying arteries of the pure blood establishment and into their blind spots. Over chocolate frogs and feigned ignorance, Harry lets Ron talk about houses, Quidditch, the ministry, while quietly mapping which uncles sit where, which prejudices are inherited, which loyalties might be bent rather than broken. Hermione Granger is the opposite entry in his mental ledger. New minted witch, muggle-born, already armed with theory. A potential research engine, yes, but more dangerously, a possible moral anchor. He tests her on the train with small heresies about rules and exceptions, watching for recoil. When she flinches at the idea of necessary sacrifices, he notes not a weakness, but a constraint, a line he might one day need or be forced to cross. He decides, with methodical certainty, to give Ron the myth of the boy who lived, and Hermione the puzzle of the Dark Lord's immortality, but not yet the prophecy, not yet the quiet truth that his own death is baked into the equation. Hogwarts rises out of the mist, and for a heartbeat, the mask almost slips. Towers like raised wands, windows like watching eyes. To an 11-year-old, it should be pure wonder. To Harry, it is an arena layered with secrets he has already seen from other angles. The chamber of secrets lurking beneath, a known threat vector waiting for its basilisk to be weaponized. The room of requirement, not yet opened, but pre-marked on his internal map as a future vault and war room. The Great Lake, a potential disposal site for cursed remnants when the Horcrux hunt accelerates. The sorting hat drops over his eyes and finds not confusion, but a quiet, tactically lethal resolve. It whispers of greatness and darkness and choice. He listens, catalogues, and chooses the house that best positions him for influence rather than comfort. Yet when the hall erupts in colour and song, when candles hover and house banners unfurl, something in his chest twists with unfamiliar resonance. Belonging, the one resource Bellatrix never simulated in the Alpine estate. He clamps down on it, like a wound. This castle is not home. It is the stage of his eventual death, the place where the prophecy will cash out its final line. As laughter and clinking goblets echo around him, Harry smiles on cue, already planning which stones must be stained, which friendships must be risked, and which part of himself he can afford to lose first. Playing the old man, Harry's first private duel with Dumbledore. The first private duel does not take place in a classroom or on a battlefield. It unfolds in an office built to look harmless. Within a week of the sorting, Harry is invited to the headmaster's study for a welcome chat. In canon, this is a room of whimsy and wonder. In this timeline, it is a map of power. Fawkes preens upon his golden perch like a living alarm system. The silver instruments hum with quiet, predatory awareness, and the portraits feign sleep with the exaggerated stillness of spies on standby. Even the sorting hat on its shelf reads, to Harry, as a spent artifact still wired into the castle's nervous system. Dumbledore opens with warmth, of course. He speaks of adjustment, of homesickness, of how overwhelming such a great fortress of learning can feel. Harry answers with calibrated earnestness, offering precisely the anxieties any 11-year-old might confess: difficulty with staircases, confusing timetables, the alien etiquette of house tables. On the surface, he is a masterpiece to be moulded. Beneath that surface, the war has already started. The legilimency arrives without wand, without word, no more than a soft pressure at the back of his consciousness, a draft probing the seals of a window. Bellatrix had described this sensation in the Alpine estate with methodical certainty, drilling occlumency into him until his mind was a layered vault. Harry feels the brush, recognizes the signature, and lets only curated images rise. A flash of Quidditch awe, a blur of homework, a flicker of childish resentment towards Snape. Harmless, predictable, tactically lethal in their banality. Dumbledore's eyes narrow by less than a heartbeat. The twinkle dims, recalibrates. Harry chooses that moment to set the knife-edge boundary, sheathed in silk. He thanks the headmaster, sincerely enough, for his concern, for taking the time to meet a boy with such a complicated history. Then, almost idly, he mentions that his guardian taught him an old pureblood maxim, that uninvited guests in one's mind are a grave breach of trust, the kind that can turn allies into enemies in a single instant. He does not accuse, he observes. The silence that follows has weight. The portraits are suddenly very awake behind their painted eyelids. Dumbledore inclines his head, the apology woven into a vague remark about old habits and academic curiosity. But the admission is there. He has underestimated this child. In the Slytherin timeline, the boy who lived is not a bewildered orphan. He is a weapon being polished in the dark. And the headmaster has just cut himself on the edge. The tension breaks only when Dumbledore presents him with the invisibility cloak. Earlier than in canon, earlier than trust has been earned, it arrives wrapped not in Christmas paper, but in legacy. He tells Harry it belonged to James Potter. For a fractional second, the dispassionate mask wavers. Soul resonance thrums along his fingers as he recognizes, dimly but unmistakably, one of the Hallows Bellatrix warned him about in whispers she dismissed as fairy tales. It is not a toy, it is a variable. Confusion and calculation not in his chest. If Dumbledore is placing a Hallow in his hands now, what does the old man think is coming? When Harry leaves, the script has failed. They are not mentor and pupil. They are rival generals smiling across a table neither intends to flip. Yet, on the stair, cloak tucked under his arm, Harry is already revising his long-term plan around this unexpected artifact, while behind him, Dumbledore watches the door and quietly decides that the next move must be his. He is wrong, because Harry has already chosen his next target, and it is not the one Dumbledore fears most. Horcrux Hunter at 11, rewriting the Philosopher's Stone year. Harry's next target is not a person. It is a pattern. In this timeline, the Philosopher's Stone is not a child's adventure waiting to happen. It is a controlled experiment, wrapped in school legend, an elegant laboratory in which an 11-year-old tests how a fragmented Dark Lord behaves when forced into proximity with his own living Horcrux. The world will remember troll attacks and midnight duels. They are wrong. From the first stuttered handshake in the great hall, Quirinus Quirrell's presence grates against Harry's soul resonance, like metal on glass. The defense professor's magic feels hollow, his aura sheared and stitched, as if another will is braided through his own. Harry recognizes the pattern from Bellatrix's Alpine lectures on possession, parasitism, and the peculiar echo of a divided soul. He does not suspect Voldemort. He files Quirrell away as a partial vessel and begins mapping the man's routes through the castle with methodical certainty. The famous trio does not form around shared danger, it forms around staged reconnaissance. When Ron drags him toward the third-floor corridor, Harry allows the detour, measuring the way the forbidden door hums against his scar. How Fluffy's enchanted slumber muffles that resonance rather than amplifying it. The stone is a pretext. The real data lies in how his body registers wards, curses, and the faint, greasy pull of immortality magic under Dumbledore's protections. Between classes, Hogwarts becomes a grid. Corridors are revisited at different times of day. Staircases are treated as rotating sensor arrays, and the library's restricted section is not a temptation, but an index. Hermione believes they are chasing answers about Nicholas Flamel. Harry is cross-checking Bellatrix's whispered theories on Horcrux anchors against dusty treatises on soul partitioning and sympathetic sacrifice. Every banned paragraph is weighed against the prophecy he already knows and the quiet, unspoken question beneath it. How many pieces did Voldemort dare to make? To Ron and Hermione, he is brilliant but inexperienced, a gifted flyer with more courage than caution. That, too, is curated. Harry lets his chess blunders stand, pretends genuine surprise at Hermione's logic, and feigns hesitation before breaking rules. In reality, he is running a different experiment, testing how each of them responds when authority is challenged, when a lie to McGonagall could save a friend, when the choice is between obedience and survival. He is not just collecting allies, he is stress-testing future officers in a coming war. The tragedy of canon is an accidental confrontation with Quirrell. In the Slytherin timeline, the final descent is an arranged interview. Harry walks through the fire, knowing precisely what waits beyond. A host body, a parasitic shade, and an opportunity. He watches how his scar flares as he steps closer, notes how Quirrell's curses stutter when cast directly at him, feels the way Voldemort's presence snarls against the living Horcrux he never chose to be. When the disembodied voice hisses about forms of immortality, Harry does the unthinkable for an 11-year-old. He asks follow-up questions. His queries are veiled, feigned awe at surviving death, carefully naive references to anchors and safeguards, but the answers are logged with clinical precision. Number of rituals implied, reliance on objects. The hint that one vessel was lost the night in Godric's Hollow. Harry leaves that chamber, not just with burns on his skin, but with a preliminary map of Voldemort's scattered soul. The stone's destruction is, to him, a calculated loss. An alchemical path to longevity is a distraction. A stone can be locked in a fortress, but a soul already fractured across the world cannot. When Dumbledore explains that Nicholas Flamel has agreed to let the stone go, Harry nods with practiced wonder, while inside he marks a more important conclusion. True victory will not come from guarding artifacts, but from hunting echoes. Year 1 ends not with awe at magic, but with data. How his presence disrupts Voldemort's magic. How Hogwarts itself sings around dark anchors. How far his friends will go before they break. A weapon being polished in the dark has taken its first measurements, and by the time the train pulls away from the station, Harry has already identified the next likely Horcrux. The diary dissected, an alternate chamber of secrets. He does not have to wait long. In flourish and blots, as Lockhart orchestrates his gaudy ambush, the real event happens in the periphery. A small black diary, slipping from Ginny Weasley's second-hand cauldron, landing near Harry's shoe, with the soft finality of a verdict. The Wizarding World will later insist this was chance, a minor incident in a chaotic shop. They are wrong. The moment his fingers brush the cover, the scar burns, not with pain, but with recognition. A deep, metallic soul resonance hums through him, the same frequency that sang through Quirrell's turban and the back of his own skull in childhood visions. In this timeline, Harry has been waiting for that note, cataloguing it, dreaming of the day it would reappear. The diary is not a curiosity. It is confirmation that his Horcrux hypothesis is not theory, but architecture. He pockets the book with methodical certainty, and the first victory is not destruction. It is restraint. Every instinct, every alpine lesson Bellatrix carved into him argues for immediate annihilation. Yet the strategist in him understands. You do not burn a library before reading the shelves. Back at Hogwarts, behind the stone privacy of a Slytherin alcove, he opens the diary and writes. Carefully curated questions, never about himself, always angled at process, limitation, and failure modes. Tom Riddle answers like a proud lecturer, delighted to find a receptive mind. Harry plays the role of the fascinated child while extracting doctrine, the mechanics of soul-splitting, the anchoring of consciousness to an object, the conditions required for possession, the vulnerabilities inherent in ink-based manifestation. Each exchange is an interrogation disguised as admiration, a weapon being polished in the dark without being interrogated, suspecting the forge. The attacks on students escalate, but here the Chamber of Secrets is not a revelation. It is a scheduled experiment. When Ginny finally vanishes, Harry walks into the bathroom entrance not as a panicked hero, but as a hunter entering a known lair, already having mapped the likely geometry of a basilisk's den and Riddle's thresholds of power. Fawkes and the Sorting Hat are not miracles. They are variables he is perversely pleased to add to the test. He lets the basilisk come close. He times the strike. When the venom-laced fang pierces the diary, he is watching not Ginny, but Riddle's unraveling. How fast the projection decays, what the magical backlash feels like against his scar, whether the soul resonance fractures or merely recoils. He notes, even as he collapses, that basilisk venom does more than destroy. It severs. Harry emerges from the chamber, not only with Ginny and a corpse, but with data. In Dumbledore's office, he lays the ruined diary on the desk and, with clinical precision, describes its sentience, its parasitic possession, its reaction to venom. The word Horcrux is not spoken by the headmaster. It is supplied by Harry, who watches the old man's eyes narrow as authority quietly migrates across the desk. In the infirmary, the fortress of white sheets and whispered relief, the war is quieter. Ginny sleeps, pale against her pillow, while the world praises Harry's courage. He sits beside her and measures the silence between heartbeats and guilt. How long did he allow the diary to feed, to tighten its grip, so he could confirm theories and map limits? Was the near death of a girl an acceptable cost for the dismantling of an immortal tyrant? For the first time, the answer does not arrive immediately. A hairline fracture appears in the masterpiece to be moulded, and Harry realizes with a chill that in the Slytherin timeline, the next Horcrux he hunts may be his own conscience. Chess, not chaos. Pre-rigging the graveyard and the ministry, the fracture does not widen in public. It retreats into silence, into nights when Harry lies awake and redraws the war on the ceiling of his dormitory like a constellation of acceptable casualties. If conscience is a Horcrux, it will be destroyed last. For now, he turns back to the board. Year 3 becomes his first real experiment in misdirection. The world believes Harry is consumed by Sirius Black, his fugitive godfather, his parents' betrayer, his would-be murderer. They are wrong. In this timeline, the Sirius crisis is a smokescreen he gladly fans, a theatrical obsession that lets him vanish into the library's darker stacks and into Dumbledore's more guarded silences. While Hermione time turns for classes, Harry time turns for reconnaissance. He traces gaunt genealogy, cross-references Peverell with Riddle, and seeds questions in Dumbledore's office with surgical precision. Idle curiosity about family rings, about curses that cling to bloodlines, about what happens when soul magic is anchored to stone. Each inquiry is an offered mirror, inviting Dumbledore to see his own suspicions reflected and act sooner. If the old man reaches for the ring a year earlier, if the curse takes hold under controlled observation rather than desperate impulse, that is not mercy, it is data. He even considers slipping away under the cloak and time turner to probe the gaunt shack himself, warding the rotten boards with escape routes and emergency beacons keyed to his wand. A weapon being polished in the dark does not simply wait for destiny to deliver artifacts, it goes hunting. By the time the Triwizard Tournament is announced, Harry's relationship with fate has shifted from resentment to appropriation. The Goblet's betrayal is not a surprise. In this Slytherin timeline, he has already mapped the only ending that makes sense of Voldemort's scattered moves: a graveyard, a ritual, blood on stone. The third task is not a maze, it is a corridor. He spends the year not just learning spells, but engineering counter-rituals. He studies ancient blood wards, designs sigils that can be layered under his skin, and works with Hermione to weave latent protections into his own circulatory system. A living ward matrix, keyed to his soul resonance with Voldemort. His wand core, twin to the Dark Lord's, becomes a conduit for sabotage. He practices micro-hexes that can ride along shared magic like parasites. Even the portkey is not left untouched. Under the guise of studying summoning charms, he experiments with binding conditional triggers to enchanted objects. If moved across certain ward lines, if exposed to a specific magical signature, they wake. The trophy he will be forced to touch becomes a sleeping landmine, its runes buried so deep that even Barty Crouch Jr., tactically lethal, but tunnel-visioned, does not notice. The graveyard, when it comes, is not an ambush, but a palimpsest. Voldemort overlays his resurrection circle, bone, flesh, blood, on ground Harry has already mapped in obsessive detail. Beneath the Dark Lord's sigils lie older, quieter geometries. Harry's wards that thin the tether between Horcruxes and host. Hex nests designed to scar nerve pathways, to make this new body exquisitely vulnerable to very specific frequencies of pain and compulsion later. Voldemort believes he is ascending into perfected power. In this timeline, his rebirth is a prototype Harry intends to exploit. 2 years later, the Ministry offers the same pattern on a grander scale. The Department of Mysteries is meant to be a labyrinth that swallows children and secrets. Harry walks into it as into a pre-surveyed fortress. He has known the prophecy's wording since childhood, known Voldemort's obsession with it, and recognizes the luring visions in his sleep as nothing more than weaponized bait. He goes anyway, but he does not go alone and blind. The DA is briefed not on heroism, but on extraction. Paired formations, fallback rendezvous points threaded through the Ministry's architecture, coded signals that turn shouted spell names into tactical updates. Reducto becomes route blocked. Stupefy at double volume means retreat to secondary choke point. He has even arranged, through carefully leaked whispers to Rita Skeeter and a timed tip to a junior unspeakable, for the Ministry's own surveillance wards to be half awake when the Death Eaters arrive. If they survive, they will not just have fought, they will have been seen. Still, the pattern of controlled burns has a cost. Sirius may yet fall through the veil. In fact, Harry has modelled scenarios where that death, public and undeniable, accelerates the collapse of Fudge's authority and forces the war into the open where his preparations matter. Each loss becomes a move he has already contemplated, a grief pre-budgeted in the ledger of victory. This is the new equilibrium. What were once chaotic traumas become events with pre-drawn contours. Fires lit where he has already built, fire breaks. The war bends toward a methodical certainty of outcome, but the moral terrain under his feet erodes with every engineered catastrophe, because somewhere beyond the Ministry, beyond the next Horcrux, waits a final confrontation Harry has deliberately not modelled in full. A moment when all his contingencies will collide with the one variable he cannot fully weaponize, his own willingness to die on purpose. And the closer he moves his pieces, the more it becomes unclear whether he is outplaying Voldemort or rehearsing for his own execution. The cost of knowing. Friends, lies, and the slow corruption of a hero. From this point on, victory is no longer a question of courage. It is a question of how much of himself Harry is willing to burn away to reach it. In this timeline, the corrosion begins in silence. Around Ron and Hermione, he performs the role the world expects, the volatile, overburdened Gryffindor who rages at Umbridge's quills, who shatters in visible grief when Sirius falls through the veil. Those emotions are real, but selectively lit. Behind them, in a private Slytherin timeline of his own mind, he is already mapping Horcrux vectors, already calculating the statistical likelihood that he will one day walk into a forest and not walk out again. He lets them see the smoke, never the engine. The gap between what he shows and what he withholds becomes a structural fault line. when he steers them away from certain corridors, when he insists on particular seating in Grimmauld Place, when he guesses that the locket matters more than the Order realizes, Hermione's intellect does what it has always done. It hunts for pattern. She notes how often his hunches align with reality, with methodical certainty, how he anticipates ambushes before any owl arrives, how his fear of his own scar has shifted into a cold, almost academic interest in soul resonance and sacrificial magic. Hermione does not confront him immediately. Loyalty chains her. Fear sharpens her. She remembers condemning Dumbledore's greater good calculus, the way the old man let children stand between the world and the dark. And now she watches Harry, a weapon being polished in the dark by his own knowledge, make the same moves with fewer apologies. When he suggests that letting Umbridge's regime tighten might flush out certain Death Eater sympathizers, she hears the echo of a headmaster she once trusted and realizes, with a quiet horror, that this masterpiece is being molded from the inside. Ron feels it differently, less as an equation, more as a betrayal. Harry's new coldness expresses itself in choices. Which Weasley is briefed on which mission, which twin is accidentally near a target, when Harry needs a distraction, when Molly is allowed to know that her children are in the line of fire. They are wrong, the family insists at first. Harry would never use them, but when he leverages Arthur's ministry access to trace a cursed ring and pointedly leaves Percy uninformed, because Percy's outrage will sell the deception better, Ron sees the manipulation, and the old resentments about fame, fortune, and being an afterthought metastasize into something darker. The moral compromises accumulate, like cursed artifacts in a hidden vault. Harry lets a minor order contact walk into an ambush at the Ministry, arriving seconds too late, because warning him would expose that Harry knew the Death Eater's route in advance. During a nocturnal raid on a suspected Horcrux cache, he drops the pretense of schoolboy dueling entirely, using borderline dark, severing curses to maim guards who might otherwise identify his foreknowledge to Voldemort. Efficient, tactically lethal, each decision is justified on the altar of the final war. Then comes the pattern interrupt, a quiet evening in the Gryffindor common room, a chessboard between them, Ron's pieces smashed, Hermione's essay abandoned, and an unspoken question thick in the air. If they understood that Harry has been planning some of their risks, some of their scars, since childhood, treating them as essential moves in a long game he never fully disclosed, would they still sit at his side? Or would they finally see not a friend, but another general behind a fortress of secrets, willing to spend any life, including his own, so long as the board ends in checkmate? Turning the tables on the greater good, Harry versus Dumbledore's endgame. The revelation does not arrive as a shattering twist in this timeline. It lands with the dull, inevitable weight of a verdict he wrote for himself years ago. Long before Pensieve Silver shows him Snape's memories, Harry has already traced the outline. The scar that hums in moments of soul resonance, the way the diary screamed when he stabbed it, the peculiar drag of Voldemort's magic against his own. He has suspected, clinically and without mercy, that he is a Horcrux. Bellatrix's early training made the hypothesis unavoidable. A weapon being polished in the dark does not indulge in comforting illusions. It interrogates its own steel. When Dumbledore and Hermione first speak the word Horcrux, Harry has already mapped the pattern. An anchor in his head, a fragment grafted in that Halloween explosion, and begun quiet experiments in isolating that foreign resonance, testing where his magic ends and something older, colder, begins. The diary's destruction only confirms the methodology. If basilisk venom can annihilate one fragment, it can annihilate another. So, when Snape's memories, or their functional equivalent, finally open like a wound, Dumbledore calmly discussing the final walk, Snape horrified, the prophecy recited in full. Harry does not experience Canon's stunned, almost reverent acceptance. There is no boy in a headmaster's office whispering, "I've got to die, haven't I?" There is calculation. The fury is not the plan. The plan is, in abstract, a methodical certainty of war. Remove the Dark Lord's last anchor by weaponizing the enemy's own obsession. What ignites Harry is the realization that, in the original Slytherin timeline, Dumbledore intended him to walk blind into that forest, believing in love while ignorant of design. Ignorance, not death, was the true requirement. They are wrong, he thinks, all of them, to imagine that the only acceptable sacrifice is the one Dumbledore scripts. In private, and in one cold, controlled confrontation, Harry turns the greater good back on its architect. If sacrifice is justified, then why is his life uniquely expendable, while Dumbledore's authority is sacrosanct? If the world may demand Harry's death to end the war, may Harry not demand the headmaster's control, or even his life, at a moment when removing that piece yields a cleaner victory? The logic is symmetrical. The asymmetry is merely habit and sentiment. From that inversion, alternate endgames proliferate. One branch has him pursue the alchemical and ritualistic, temporary separation of the Horcrux, forcing the fragment into a vessel that can be destroyed while his own body remains intact. A masterpiece to be moulded from dark and sanctified magic alike. Another envisions the forest not as martyrdom, but as trap, engineering a resonance spike so precise that when Voldemort casts the killing curse, it shears only the parasite, leaving the host collapsed but recoverable. A third, perhaps the bleakest, accepts death outright, but on his schedule, at the instant when Voldemort's other anchors are gone, his forces overextended, his Nagini exposed and tactically lethal, only as bait. What matters is no longer whether he dies. It is who chooses when, and to what strategic yield. By the time the final battle assembles, Hogwarts a fortress, the alpine chill of Bellatrix's lessons echoing in his poise, Harry is not a lamb led to slaughter. He is a player who has stared at this square on the board since he first read the prophecy, walking toward the forest not as victim, but as the author of the last move. And Voldemort, for the first time, is stepping into a script he did not write. A different battle of Hogwarts, turning the castle into a Horcrux kill zone. When the battle finally comes, it does not erupt, it unfolds. It is less an explosion than the slow, terrible locking of gears Harry has been aligning for years. In this timeline, the Battle of Hogwarts is not a desperate last stand around a crumbling fortress. It is the activation of a weapon being polished in the dark since his first sorting feast. While other students memorized staircases by misadventure, Harry mapped them with military precision cataloguing which steps froze under disillusionment, which portraits lied, which secret passages hummed with an older, deeper soul resonance when he walked past with the diary's ruined shell in his pocket. Every year, another experiment, a jinx anchored to a gargoyle, a blood rune hidden beneath a tapestry, a whispered request to the room of requirement to show me what you do to parasites. By 6th year, he has his answer. The castle does not merely shelter, it reacts. In the Slytherin timeline, that discovery becomes doctrine, with Hermione's arithmetic models and Bellatrix's dark lexicon. Harry begins quietly enchanting structural nerves of Hogwarts to flare when Horcrux magic is near, but only when he speaks the triggers. A corridor that seems ordinary will, under the right incantation, become a crushing vice of shifting stone. A forgotten classroom will exhale fiend fire like a living organ rejecting a graft. The building is no longer passive architecture, it is a masterpiece to be molded into a kill zone. So when Voldemort's army surrounds the school, Harry does not defend Hogwarts. He starts the operation. Phase 1 is Nagini. The snake is both Horcrux and bodyguard, never far from her master, never exposed, unless the master believes he is hunting a boy. Harry leaks through captured minds and staged retreats, the illusion of a panicked evacuation through the lower corridors. The DA and Select Order members are not simply holding lines, they are herding. Shield walls open and close with methodical certainty, driving Death Eaters and their precious serpent into a stone throat Harry has primed with layered anti-apparition nets and constricting walls. When the trigger word falls from his lips, the corridor itself attacks, compressing, sealing, and finally flooding with controlled fiend fire, calibrated to seek the snake's signature. Phase 2 is the diadem. Canon remembers the Room of Requirement fire as a chaotic accident born of Crabbe's panic. They are wrong. Here, Harry has rehearsed this burn for years. He has tested the room's limits, learned how it hoards and how it purges. Under battle cover, he enters not as a scavenger, but as an executioner, having already seeded the room with alchemical accelerants and containment wards. When he commands it to destroy all that should not exist within these walls, the resulting inferno is not wild. It is a surgical incineration of contraband and crown alike, a tactically lethal bonfire that he times to coincide with Voldemort's attention fixed elsewhere. Phase 3 is the Elder Wand and Snape. The boathouse is not a frantic chase, it is an appointment. Harry has already calculated that Voldemort must kill Snape to claim wand authority, and he has contingencies for every outcome. Hidden listeners, pre-placed pensieve vials, escape vectors through the Black Lake. Snape's death is still brutal, still personal, but it is also an information transfer Harry has built the night around. As Voldemort flaunts the Elder Wand in the courtyard, believing at last that the world itself will bow, Harry is already moving pieces into the final pattern. By dawn, Hogwarts is bleeding, but not broken. The battle has claimed lives, but not direction. This is not a story of children improvising heroism in collapsing corridors. It is the execution of a war plan, drafted in an alpine study and refined in dungeon classrooms. The castle has ceased to be a victim and become a weapon, and as Voldemort realizes that every corridor he walked was chosen for him, the real trap The final resonance between boy, castle, and death has yet to spring. Would he still walk into the forest? The final choice rewritten. The revelation does not happen in a forest. It happens in a mirror. In this timeline, the image from the opening returns with brutal symmetry. Harry, much older now, moving through the shattered corridors of his own fortress school, catching his reflection in a cracked window pane. The boy who once mouthed the prophecy in an alpine study now repeats it under his breath as he walks toward the tree line, not in stunned acceptance, but with the methodical certainty of a sentence long since passed. This is not discovery. This is execution. They are wrong, those who imagine the forest walk as a last-minute act of Gryffindor courage, a boy flinging himself into the dark because there is no other path. Years before this night, Harry has mapped alternatives with the cold diligence of a war mage, obscure rituals to extract foreign soul resonance, theoretical models for transferring the Horcrux into condemned prisoners, even the unthinkable option of anchoring it into a controlled vessel, Bellatrix, perhaps, or a willing fanatic. Each avenue is tested in parchment, in clandestine experiments, in whispered debates with Hermione over the boundaries of humanity. Every path fails, or worse, succeeds only in theory at the price of turning victory into a laboratory atrocity. A world where he survives by damning others to eternal fragmentation is, to him, merely Voldemort with better branding. The final choice, when it comes, is not born of ignorance. It is the end point of a tactically lethal cost-benefit analysis. He has run the numbers. His death is the cleanest variable to remove. This changes the emotional texture of the forest utterly. Canon gives us a boy realizing, in a single night, that he must die. The Slytherin timeline offers something far more chilling. A man who has been living under that decree since childhood, finally cashing in the debt on his own terms. There is no trembling, no last-minute bargaining with fate. There is logistics. Who commands the sovereign army after him? What signals Hermione will trigger when Voldemort believes the castle broken? How to ensure that his apparent surrender cements Voldemort's overconfidence? Pattern interrupt. He smiles, not with joy, but with the faint, precise satisfaction of a trap about to close. His death is not a capitulation, it is bait. The question, then, is whether he walks alone. In this timeline, secrecy has been both shield and weapon, a habit learned under Bellatrix's tutelage, as a weapon being polished in the dark. Yet on this night, the burden he has hoarded becomes a liability. If he dies without fully briefing his inner circle, the war machine he built may fracture into cult, chaos, or paralysis. If he tells them, if he looks Hermione and Draco in the eye and states without euphemism that he is going to the forest to be killed, he risks mutiny, or worse, an attempt to substitute themselves. He chooses disclosure, but precise, surgical, and framed as strategy rather than confession. Hermione receives the full architecture of the plan, down to the timing of the counterstrike. Draco receives orders, not explanations, because Harry understands which friend needs truth and which needs function. Ron, in this darker world, is either distant or dead. The emotional triangulation of canon is replaced by a more austere geometry of loyalty. His walk into the forest becomes the culmination of a lifelong experiment. How far can one bend morality, strategy, and selfhood in the name of victory, and still, at the end, refuse the final compromise of surviving at any cost? Harry steps between the trees as both architect and offering, the last variable he is willing to sacrifice. The world will call it martyrdom. He knows better. It is controlled demolition. And when the killing curse falls, the question is no longer whether he dies, but what, exactly, he has wired to explode in the silence that follows. Aftermath of a different war, who Harry becomes, and who we'd become. In the echo after that curse, the entire architecture of this alternate war becomes visible. Not as a sequence of lucky escapes and improvised courage, but as a lattice of premeditated detonations laid by a boy who knew the plan before he ever saw a wand. From the first flicker of soul resonance on Halloween 1981, this timeline diverges. The connection does not merely scar Harry, it informs him. A prophecy overheard in full, Snape's terror-stricken memories dissected without sentiment, Dumbledore's omissions mapped with methodical certainty. Together they create a child who walks into Hogwarts already aware that he must die, already charting Horcruxes long before the word is spoken aloud in class. The diary is not an accident. The ring is not a discovery. Each is a scheduled removal in a private war. In this Slytherin timeline, Harry's upbringing is not neglect in a cupboard, but cultivation in silence, a weapon being polished in the dark by adults who think they are using him, and who never quite realize he is measuring them in return. The chamber is not a mystery, it is a controlled experiment in basilisk deployment and artifact destruction. The graveyard is not a trap, it is a stress test of Voldemort's resurrected body and chain of command. Even the final walk into the forest is no longer a stunned surrender, but the last step in a design he has already audited for weak points. That design reframes everyone around him. Dumbledore ceases to be the benevolent chess master and becomes a rival strategist, an older general whose doctrine of the greater good Harry quietly appropriates, then surpasses. Voldemort, who once seemed the only planner on the board, is reduced to a man whose every contingency has been pre-read and slowly inverted, his Horcrux network collapsing in the exact sequence Harry predicted years prior. Ron and Hermione, canon's moral anchors, now orbit a leader whose secrets run deeper than either friendship or schoolyard loyalty, following a boy who already knows which of them survives certain nights and chooses, deliberately, not to tell. The central tension of this world is not merely good versus evil, but foreknowledge versus humanity. Knowing the script lets Harry shorten the war, close the Ministry debacle before it spirals, turn the astronomy tower into a sting rather than a murder scene, and convert Hogwarts into a fortress before the first siege. Yet every saved life is purchased with another quiet compromise, a manipulated ally, an instrumentalized death, an almost inhuman detachment from his own fate. So the question turns outward. If you knew your enemy's entire plan from the start, every Horcrux, every ambush, every betrayal, how far would you go to win? Would you accept being a masterpiece to be molded, a child forged into a weapon, if it meant ending the war years earlier? Where would you draw the line that this Harry keeps pushing back, inch by inch, until it finally breaks in the forest. In the comments, rewrite the beats we only sketched. How does your forewarned Harry handle the chamber when he recognizes the diary as a sole anchor on sight? What does your graveyard look like if he walks in already knowing which Death Eaters he intends to let escape for later use? Does he still step into the trees alone, or does he bring the whole world to witness the end of Voldemort's authority? This episode is one branch on a much larger, darker tree of possibilities. If you want more excursions into these Alpine timelines, a Hermione who takes the throne instead, a Dumbledore who never relinquishes power, stay with the channel, leave your version of the war below, and we will keep descending together.